changing their name will now think of changing their name and using and abusing the situation. Our children are too precious. We've got to look after them. Mine are all grandchildren now. I want them safe.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I want to congratulate the Honourable Member for Rotherham for securing this important debate in the Backbench Business Committee, for granting it. I was supporting her application, and there is cross-party support for this issue and how to tackle it. But I thought it was important, although I might be repeating some of the things that have been said already, I wanted to add my voice to this important debate and support the victims of terrible crimes who are committed, because there is a legal loophole that we here in Parliament can actually fix. The stories of crimes committed by previous sex offenders who have changed their names should be a wake-up call for all of us. The current name change process is very poorly regulated and not fit for purpose. Although it is a crime for a sex offender to change their name without notifying the police, the onus to this lies solely with the offender. And we have already heard, sort of thinking that these guys are going to be honourable and honest is just a mistake, and we shouldn't let them get away with it. It creates a legal loophole that makes the reporting system unreliable. It means that a sex offender can obtain a new legal document to hide their identity and evade justice. The loopholes are used deliberately by sex offenders to continue to commit their crimes. This must stop. I commend Della Wright's courageous campaigning to close this loophole. This loophole undercuts so much of the progress that we have made in tackling sex offenders if perpetrators can just wipe out their past. It renders the sex offenders register, the domestic violence disclosure scheme and the DBS checks totally ineffective. Sex offenders should not be eluding authorities. One sex offender changed his name after his release from prison following convictions for sexual assault against children. His background went undetected despite 2 encounters with Lincolnshire police and 1 with social services. He went on to brutally strip and murder 13-year-old Sandy Hatfield. What a terrible tragedy. Another registered sex offender was able to change his name by deed poll. He moved to Spain, became a teacher, as we have already heard, and worked as a live-in au pair, despite being barred from working with children. He was only arrested after the school found hidden cameras in their toilets. Where were the checks? As chair of the APPG for the prevention of childhood trauma, I am aware of the lifelong consequences facing children who have faced sexual abuse. Many children carry their traumatic experience into later life, and I want to acknowledge the people who are sitting in the public gallery who have all faced these terrible traumas.
Hear, hear.
Those who experience childhood traumas are twice as likely to develop depression and 3 times as likely to develop anxiety disorder. And again, we must recommend all survivors of childhood traumas for their courage to live their lives and continue with the strength that they live their lives. It is a stain on our country that 1 in 6 children have been sexually abused. We need to protect children, and closing this loophole today, that we are talking today, will make it harder for dangerous sex offenders to repeat their crimes. Ultimately, there is an issue with a wider criminal justice system. In cases of recorded rape case last year, charges were only brought in 4% of cases. It is highly likely that people who have committed a crime are walking amongst us unknowingly. 5 in 6 women do not report their rape to the police. With so many survivors of sexual and domestic violence denied justice, is it any surprise that report rates continue to be so low? If we want to encourage women to come forward, they need to be sure that violent and abusive perpetrators are brought to justice and continue to be brought to justice. It is horrifying to think that even if a woman gets her rapist convicted, they may still escape the consequences later on and go on to commit a horrific crime after changing their name. Enabling sex offenders to change their names means they can lie about their past. The Safeguarding Alliance reports that offenders have used name changes to hide their backgrounds from their new partners and children. I cannot imagine the fear of learning that your partner is not the one who you think it is. The lack of a joined-up approach to tackling name changes means that key details of an offender's past can be missed. There should be a national centralised sex offenders registers maintained by the Home Office to ensure an interlinked, joined-up approach is taken to sex offenders management. We must place responsibility for name changes onto the relevant authorities to ensure offenders are not able to slip under the radar. I too welcome the Safeguard Alliance proposed tagging system on sex offenders' passports and driving licence. This would stop offenders from using official documents to escape justice. Sex offenders should not be able to use new names to secure DBS checks that allow them to work with children and vulnerable people. And again, we have heard today that they do this deliberately. They're using a job in order to get to children and young people and indeed to women in order to commit their heinous crimes. There must be a system in which their crimes are flagged when applying for employment. We must take our obligations to victims very, very seriously. We cannot say that we have delivered justice for survivors if the perpetrators are left to secretly carry on their crimes. Abuse never leaves its victims, so sex offenders should never be able to walk away from their crimes in such a way that leaves them free to commit new, appalling crimes. Thank you.
Hear, hear.
Tonia Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and huge thanks to the Honourable Member for Rotherham on bringing this important subject before the Chamber today and for bringing it to national prominence. Her role in this has been extraordinary. I'd also like to put my thanks on record to women like Della who have waived their anonymity in order to expose the serious failures in the DBS system and to ensure that the law is changed to keep people safe. Now, as colleagues will no doubt have seen in their own constituencies, the reaction of most people on hearing about this loophole is one of just utter disbelief. Disbelief that calls for simple changes like the deed poll asking if the applicant has a criminal record haven't been made. Disbelief that a system so many of them have encountered anywhere from their children's school to local sports club features such a fundamental flaw. And disbelief that despite years and years of warning from campaigners that the name change loophole still exists, it's been treated as an administrative headache, not a serious risk. And now I want to take this opportunity to highlight an area of concern which the Honourable Member for Telford and the Honourable Member for Edinburgh South West have already raised, because where good intentions have not been balanced with, with the risk of leaving another avenue to be exploited, and it's so dangerous. Because a DBS grants enhanced privacy rights to individuals who change their gender when changing their identity. And these are exceptional rights, and they are only granted to individuals from this group. The result is the identity verification is compromised, meaning that there is no guarantee that the information returned during the check and displayed on the certificate will be accurate or even complete. These exceptional privacy rights also allow an applicant who has changed gender to request all their previous names are withheld from a DBS certificate that is issued. And this right to conceal previous identities isn't given to anybody else. Disclosing previous identities is a key component of safeguarding, and DBS certificates issued to all other individuals display all other names the applicant has used. Applicants who change their gender are also permitted to conceal their sex, and the DBS certificate issued will display their required gender instead. Mr Deputy Speaker, this right is not granted to any other individual. The importance of sex to safeguarding means that for all other applicants, their sex is always displayed. There cannot be any exceptions in safeguarding. For the system to work, it must apply the same standards to everyone. And sadly, it is simply naive to think that loopholes in this system will not be exploited. Now, as colleagues have outlined, the system as is relies on the honesty of sex offenders to ensure it functions as it should. And the Honourable Member for Mole Valley highlighted this in his speech, that they're not to be trusted and not honest. Data obtained by the BBC from police forces highlights just how flawed this approach is. Between 2019 and 2021, there have been more than 5,500 offences committed by sex offenders or failing to comply with notification requirements, such as not telling the police they were living in a household with a child. The Disclosing and Barring Service found 2,190 applicants for checks had criminal records, and they had supplied incorrect or missed out personal details such as past names or aliases. A total of 6,740 prosecutions began over the past 3 financial years for offences by sex offenders of breaches of a sexual harm prevention order or an interim order. Look, the system is broken and we must fix it. And we have plenty of damning evidence as to why we should. After being released from prison only 3 years into his 6-year sentence for indecent assault following a string of sexual assault convictions against children, Timothy Cuff changed his name to Timothy Barnett. His new name change allowed him to hide his criminal past, including from his new partner and 3 children. And as Timothy Barnett, he answered the door to 13-year-old Sandy Hadfield, who knocked looking for her friend. After giving her vodka, he lured her into a quiet area of the woods where he attempted to have sex with her before slitting her throat. Owing to his name change, his background went undetected even after 2 encounters with Lincolnshire Police and 1 encounter with social services. A system that means a convicted child sex offender is not identified despite encounters with the police and social services is one that is fundamentally broken, and one that in this case led to the most tragic of outcomes. But sex offenders are not just changing their name post-trial to hide their convictions, they are also changing their name at trial or just before to protect their name on their birth certificate. This has been highlighted in the high-profile case of Department for International Development worker Peter Davis, who became James Robert Harris before trial, allowing him to keep all records of his birth name clean should he decide to use it again. This loophole gives sex offenders and abusers, many of whom rely on their ability to manipulate in order to carry out their crimes, an opportunity to hide their criminal history and pass the very checks that are meant to keep the most vulnerable safe. And this loophole renders not only the DBS redundant, but also to the Domestic Violence Disclosure Scheme, to the Sex Offenders Register, to the Child Sex Offender Disclosure Scheme. It almost seems absurd that we are even discussing this 20 years on from the Bichard inquiry, which identified the ability, as has been spoken of today, the ability of the serial predator Ian Huntley to change his name by deed poll to Ian Nixon, successfully severing the link with his existing police records, meant no alarms were raised and he was employed as a school caretaker. That this loophole still exists, allowing, indeed enabling, serial predators to create new identities is a scandal. Mr Deputy Speaker, we are in this place to be legislators. We are in this place to make those decisions and to ask those questions, what if and how. And we have to safeguard the most vulnerable people in society from these bad actors in all legislation. But I would like to pay tribute to everybody in the gallery today and to the Honourable Member for Rotherham, who has been outstanding on this issue. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Wind-ups, Allan Dorrans.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and good afternoon. Mr Deputy Speaker, may I begin by congratulating and thanking the Honourable Member for Rotherham for securing this important debate and making excellent points in relation to the scale and seriousness of this problem, and the Honourable Member for Telford for sharing her horrific case of her constituent Joanna, and the Honourable Member for Edinburgh South-West, I beg your pardon, for highlighting the serious safeguarding issues around this point. And all other honourable members from Bolsover, Liverpool, Wavertree, Moore Valley, Bath and Gower for their important contributions, put so eloquently. Mr Deputy Speaker, I speak in support of this motion. The current situation where someone convicted of a sexual offence may change their name by deed poll and potentially conceal their previously offending history without committing an offence is an extremely obvious and serious loophole in current legislation. The introduction of new legislation will serve as a strong deterrent to those minded to change their name by deed poll and will provide additional protection for communities and in particular for girls and women who are most likely to be subject of such serious offences. Mr Deputy Speaker, this is an important issue for all of our constituents In a recent petition to Parliament, 37,400 people across the United Kingdom signed a petition, including 151 people from my constituency of Ayr, Carrick and Kilmarnock. That petition was to revoke the right of registered sex offenders to change their names by deed poll. Registered sex offenders are currently managed by the police and multi-agency protection agencies in all police force areas. Tough checks are carried out and a range of legislative measures are available for the police to manage known sex offenders living in the community. However, information received from the Safeguarding Alliance through a Freedom of Information request between 2017 and 2020 revealed there were at least 913 sex offenders who were missing. These Freedom of Information figures relate only to those that have notified or been caught for failure to notify. The figures do not account for the many, many more registered sex offenders who may be living and working with children and vulnerable adults using a new name and identity. Every one of those registered sex offenders who are missing has the potential to reoffend, and every effort must be made to trace them as a matter of urgency before they have the opportunity to commit further serious sexual offences. Mr. Deputy Speaker, only 17 police services out of 43 in England and Wales have replied to this extremely important Freedom of Information request from the Safeguarding Alliance. From the limited available information, it suggests that a total figure of registered sex offenders who are missing is very likely to be at least several thousand more. It is very concerning and unacceptable to note that the Safeguarding Alliance only received 17 replies.
Hear, hear.
This is a failure by 26 police services, and this should be brought to attention of His Majesty's Inspector of Constabularies. If we do not know the extent of the problem, we cannot legislate for it. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in the controversial Soul murder case more than 20 years ago, the killer Ian Huntley had changed his name by deed poll and applied for a school janitor post, but Humberside Police failed to check his record fully. I do not intend to repeat what has already been said by the Honourable Member for Edinburgh South West and others about the murder of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman in Soho. However, the greatest risk to the public is that those who have been convicted of serious sexual offences and placed on the sex offenders register who simply change their name without going through the formalities of a deed poll are the most serious. One extreme example of this, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is Peter Tobin, who was a Scottish serial killer with convictions for serious sexual assault and rape of two 14-year-old girls in England, for which he was sentenced in 1994 to 14 years in prison and released in 2004. In 2006, using a false name of Pat McLaughlin, Tobin obtained work as a church handyman in Glasgow, where he murdered a 23-year-old Polish student, Angelika Kluck, and buried her body under the floor of the church. During a subsequent investigation into Tobin's past, he was convicted of murdering two further young women. He was also being linked to several unsolved disappearances and the murder of several women and young girls and numerous serious sexual assaults throughout the country. The important point I wish to make on this, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that during his time, Tobin is known to have used at least 40 different names, and stayed at numerous addresses and avoided complying with the conditions of notifying Police Scotland and other police services throughout the country when he changed his name and address, which he was required to do so, but failed to do so, despite being on the Sex Offenders Register since 1994. This loophole allows sex offenders to change their name by deed poll and illustrates the dangers of sex offenders changing their name by deed poll or otherwise to conceal their true identity, and they pose a significant risk to the public, and that the tracing, identification and prosecution of these individuals must remain an absolute priority for police services across the country. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in conclusion, I fully understand there will be circumstances where an individual previously convicted of sex offences wishes to change their name legally by deed poll with the genuine hope of a fresh start and a new identity. However, if a change in legislation were to prevent just one person from being the subject of a serious sexual assault or worse, then it would be totally justified and another measure to keep people, particularly women and girls, safe.
Hear, hear.
This may be controversial and criticised as excessive by some and considered by others as a restriction or reduction in their human rights. However, the current legislation is seriously flawed by this loophole and as it stands is not fit for purpose and it must be changed. The duty of this House and all of us in it is to protect people and to keep them safe. I therefore offer my full support to closing this loophole